techniques of managing the masses and giving them perceptions, the authorized perceptions. And I mentioned this man called Adam Curtis, who studied in Oxford University, who was into the various sciences, behavioral sciences, and so on. So he understood, obviously, these techniques, and perhaps that's why he made different documentaries on them, using archived information which wasn't shown to the public before, but there it was. They had it at places like the BBC. And in Nuremberg trials, they were set up to try and prove to the public that this was a just war. And they tried, and I'll leave the links at the end of the show. They tried to get Göring to admit he was guilty. And of course, Göring had psychopathic qualities. He didn't see right and wrong the same way as anyone else. He saw whatever was functional for the period. But the whole idea was to try and get him to admit that through coercion and lies and deceit, they basically usurped government for their own ends by using a totalitarian form of government over the people. And Göring didn't deny that. He just didn't see anything wrong with it. He said it's the only thing that would work at that time. And of course, remember the whole drive for a long, long time, pre-World War II, was to create the system of democracy. But this takes me into the second series, another series that Adam Curtis did on this very topic of democracy. But it's called Century of the Self. And it's fascinating, really. Remember, too, that with all exposés, there's a lot omitted. For instance, he never goes into the fact that down through the last 100 years, there have been big organizations like the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the CFR and a host of other, and you've got the trilaterals and many, many other organizations all working together to bring in their particular global system. And they still use the term democracy, but it's so secretive and so all infiltrating through all systems of government that it's just too big for the average person to manage even in their head. It's so huge because they're heavily funded, have hundreds of departments working on special projects and so on. But it's still worth watching Adam Curtis's series of videos here, going through the techniques that they used. Now, they used just at the end of World War I, Edward Bernays. Everyone's heard his name. He was the nephew of Freud. And supposedly, we're told, he used Freud's techniques of understanding this vast sea of the unconscious that's in everyone, the vast sea of emotions and thoughts and symbols and so on, to use that on the people to create a form of democracy. And he was hired by President Wilson when he was only about 24, apparently, so we're told. I think there's a lot more to this man myself. But to go over to set up the League of Nations, and went over to France, and they had this amazing big parades and all the rest of it, as really promoting the birth of a new order, world order, even back then, and to bring in democracy. So Edward Bernays, the nephew of Freud, was heavily involved in the setting up of the techniques that would be used for propaganda purposes. And he was open about the term initially called propaganda. He wrote a book called Propaganda. It's worth reading, on how to manipulate the masses. And Bernays went on to have an amazing career. And he ended up being a very, very old man. They lived to a long age, these guys who have no particular scruples. And while he was doing all this kind of stuff, the daughter of Freud had basically taken over the budding Institute of Psychiatry. In fact, she was the head person for basically the world's institutes or institutes of psychiatry. And her word was law. Whatever she said became law, basically, in psychiatry. And their whole opinion in psychiatry at the end of World War I, between between the two wars was that the general person within the population, average person, couldn't be trusted to literally make rational decisions on anything. They saw the people as a big mob, basically, the vast mob, who simply reacted on whimsical emotions that all came out of this great unconscious that Freud called it. And this stuff was taken seriously by governments who are always wary of the people they rule over. So Edward Bernays went on to have a career helping politicians make policies, etc., how to market ideas to the public using Freud's techniques. But I think it's beyond Freud, to be honest. I think this man was trained in a much greater depth of understanding, because he appeared, as I say, at 24, knowing all this stuff. And supposedly, in his own words, he just read a book by his uncle. I don't believe that at all. I think he was specially trained for his role. And psychiatry became a very powerful tool in helping governments manage its peoples and get policies across. But he also went into marketing at the same time, working for big private clients and big banks like Lehman Brothers. And we'll be back with more of the story after the following break. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and we're cutting through the matrix, discussing some videos made by Adam Curtis on the century of self, as they call it, where he talks about Edward Bernays, who, this incredible man, was the supposed genius behind mass marketing and then individual, and actually categorizing different types of people according to what you could basically sell them by understanding their psychology. But he also was an advisor to presidents. And then he was also working at the same time with big banking institutions and Lehman Brothers, who were developing big chains of clothing and appliance outlets across the country. They brought him in to try and find ways to convince the public to stop buying things because they would last long and they were good quality, etc., but to make them want things by using these inhibited or suppressed emotions. So these things would fulfill, there'd be a temporary fill for these suppressed emotions. And again, Edward Bernays, we're told, had this great ability to understand the problem right away and make it work, to find ways around it. He also, at one point, had a client who ran the whole of Guatemala at one point. And it was a big, massive company, a fruit company, mainly bananas. And everybody worked on banana plantations. And his client in the U.S. was upset because a new president had been elected, who was not communist, by the way. He was socialist to the extent that he wanted to share the wealth with the people. And so the company based in the States asked him to fix it in some way or another. So Bernays went into action. He went to see Eisenhower, and between them they conspired to convince the public that this man, this president that was elected, was a communist, which they knew he wasn't. And they even set up a movie company to churn out fake news reels on this man, to show he was a red menace living next door. And the U.S. taxpayer funded a war with Guatemala. And they went in there and bombed the bejesus out of Guatemala. Then at the end of it, the U.S. put in their own puppet regime. The company was paid Mr. Bernays very well for restoring their big, massive fruit plantations and so on. And the U.S. taxpayer funded the war. But we're not dealing here with just little con men. We're dealing with people who have the psychopathic abilities, who are up at the top. But they also have some kind of knowledge of the sciences of real psychology, motivational behavior, and so on. And